to Bitcoin Podcast. The only one that's making your money is you. Listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. So hold on and listen to the Bitcoin Podcast.
And hello, everyone. Welcome back to another one of the Bitcoin podcast interviews and the best time of your week. Today, we're joined by Mr. Jay Rush, the CEO of TrueBlocks. And TrueBlocks, I'm sure I'm going to give you more than a platform to speak to on your own, but it's a company that's trying to make it easier to gather data out of the Ethereum blockchain, right? So we'll start like we always start. Jay, what's your background? How did you fall into crypto? Tell us a little bit. Tell us a story. Who is Jay?
Well, I'm an older member of the crypto community, probably one of the older ones. Been around in computers since prior to Microsoft.
Oh, wow.
Writing software since early 1980s. So I was very, very interested in the early internet when it first came out. I used the internet prior to the World Wide Web, so I was very interested in the World Wide Web because it let people share information in a way that we never could before, and everyone was so excited by this capability. And, for 7 or 8 years, I did that, and it kind of didn't turn into that. It didn't turn into exactly what we thought we were building. So then I went and became a poet because I wanted to be a poet my whole life. And I went and did that from like 2005 until about 2013 or 14. I was teaching English and teaching poetry. And probably about 2013, I heard about Bitcoin. And I got really, really interested in Bitcoin because they were talking about the same sorts of things that we had been talking about 20 years earlier with the internet, about how we're going to be able to share information and better educate each other and better communicate with each other through this undeniable source of information. And but I didn't really bite on Bitcoin until 2016, late in 2015, I heard about Ethereum, and then I just bit, and I've have my teeth in it ever since. So I just fell in love with the idea that we can do basically what we thought we could do back in 1994 with the World Wide Web, which is make the world a better place, basically. So.
I hope that blockchain doesn't go the same path the World Wide Web has gone.
I'm extremely concerned that it will. Actually.
That's probably what this whole conversation is going to be.
We can get into it. I'm sure that's where this is going to go because that's what I think about all the time.
Oh, man. Before we go into that, how do you go from where's your poetry? Where can we find it? I got to know. And have you put it in any blockchains?
Make it into NFTs?
Yeah.
That's the obvious thing to do these days, is just make it directly into an NFT, right?
Well, I discovered after about 5 years that poetry is not terribly lucrative. So there's not a lot of poetry out there. There's some websites if you search for Thomas J. Rush, you might find some poetry out there if you wanted to look. So I really, really enjoyed that.
Jesse's on it. Look at him.
No, not.
I'm the kind of person that kind of falls down a rabbit hole, and I just kind of let myself fall, and I go without reservation into the whatever it is that I'm interested in. And that happened to me. I just got captured, and I just went. So, but it's not really something that you can make a living. Not even. I mean, I don't think there's 6 poets in the history of the world that ever made a living off of poetry. So
Jay-Z, Nas, LL Cool J.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
All right, I'll change it. There's not a medium talent poet that's made it.
So for
No,
some
I
additional
understand.
backstory, I call him TJ because that's what. So like we met through the internets. I've known TJ for quite a while now. We met through the internets in the DAO Slack when the DAO was happening on Ethereum, and we were in the what was the name of that channel we were in? Like
Yeah.
data people or something. I don't
Yeah,
know, like
probably.
it's basically like an analysis channel
Right.
of all of the like looking at what the data was showing on the blockchain and trying to understand as much as we could around like the technical part of the DAO. And then the hack happened, and that entire group basically turned into like a bunch of white hat hackers and bloggers of what's going on,
Yeah.
like who this person is, what information can we find. And then I don't know anyone in that group that hasn't gone off to like continue doing a similar vein of things in the
Yeah.
Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah. Because it was so unbelievably intense when the DAO, like prior to the DAO coming out, and as the DAO was first for sale, because everyone believed that we were building something that was unique in the world that had never existed before. Back then, we were experimenting with something that was brand new. 40,000 people in a smart contract that you couldn't change the software. There was no upgrade path to the software. And about 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe 5 weeks before it was released, there was not even any curator or owner of this piece of software. There was nobody that had special privilege. Every single person that had a token had exactly the same privilege in the contract.
There was some curators. There's a list of curators.
But that came late. That came
Yeah.
really late in the process, almost like a couple weeks before it was deployed. So, when I first heard of the DAO, it was uncontrollable software. It was software that could not be, there was no back door for any people to change the way it operated. And that was on purpose because we wanted to build that piece of software and only have it operate by everyone who had tokens combined. And then I think people got a little frightened and they put in that curator stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to the curator, that idea of building a piece of software that was immutable, could not change, and had 40,000 owners was just stunning. It was so stunning. I'm still here 7 years later trying to do exactly that same thing. Like why did we not build that? What failed there? That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out.
Did you have Slurp at that
Yeah.
time?
I did. Well, yeah.
Why don't we start by why don't we go on that path a little bit to tell the audience and us what you started building and what it's become today.
Sure. So, I had been a poet for about 7 years, so I kind of was just coming back into the space. So I didn't really have the benefit of knowing current technology. So I wrote this piece of code that, one of the things that people were thinking back then was, and people said this all the time, was that every single person had equal access to the data that was being produced. So everyone could see everything. It was purely transparent, right? But then you get into it and you start trying to look at this data, and it's just the least transparent data that I've ever seen. So you could go to Etherscan to get data, but that just didn't make any sense to me because we were trying to build this decentralized piece of software where another thing that happened back then is everybody ran their own node on their own machine because that's how the decentralized network was supposed to work. You were supposed to be running your own node. And if you're running your own node, you should be able to get the data directly from the node. And that was always what I thought we were building. But then when you start trying to get that data from the node, it was just meager and it was nearly impossible to get it especially for this really large active contract. So I built a piece of software that tried to extract the transactional data from the DAO. And the only way I could make it work was to use Etherscan. So this was just an API, just reading an API from Etherscan. And it never made sense to me, ever. It just didn't make sense. I called that Ether Slurp. And people used it a little bit to get some data off the chain. But then, I always just felt that was wrong. So then I've been working ever since like December of 2016 on writing code that lets me get the data directly from the chain the way that I think it should be gotten. I don't think we should have to go to Etherscan to get the data. So that leads into what I built, which is called TrueBlocks. So Ether Slurp was basically the best I could do at the time, and it was a third-party API reader, basically.
Yeah, I think you built the C version of what I built in Python.
Very likely. Yeah, you even got. In fact, I was jealous of you because you got your thing up on Etherscan as an official Etherscan.
I think it's still
thing.
there.
It's still there. I just looked at it the other day.
It's still there.
It is still.
Corey, I don't even know what this accomplishment is, and I'm sad you never told it to me. Two,
so here, I'll share my screen. Give me a second.
But while you set that up, I have to know, and I'm calling you TJ via proxy through
Perfect.
I have to know, TJ, why such conviction that people shouldn't have to go to Etherscan and get their data, and people should be able to read it from the blockchain?
Because I believe that if there's someone between the user and the data, that someone will eventually become someone who invades privacy. I just think it just seems likely to me that that's where it is. And this is literally exactly what happened with the early internet. It's exactly the same thing, because I can't get to the data other than going through someone else. So what that means is, because Etherscan is a web server, it's a shared resource. And what has to happen is I have to tell them who I am in order to get there. Now, I may not tell them directly who I am, but they know who I am.
Mm-hmm. Just from your behavior.
As soon as they know who I am, they connect me to my address. And now my privacy is going to be invaded. And eventually they're going to figure out how valuable that information is. And now I'm in the same position as I am today with Google. And I actually think it's a much worse position because the data is so much more intimate. The data of my spending is extremely intimate data. It's revealing data. So I think it's really important that we build a system that doesn't fall prey to this kind of snooping mentality. And I'm not casting aspersions against Etherscan. They're great. I love Etherscan. I use it all the time. It's just in the end, it will eventually go there because it's so valuable.
It's very true. And but we're talking about something kind of deep here because, hold up, before I go into that, Corey, what are we looking at right here?
This is
Give
what
us the lowdown.
He said.
That's it right there.
I built the Python version of EtherSlurp a long time ago in order to do a lot of my token analysis distribution pieces that I wrote on Medium, and somehow or another, like Etherscan put it on their website, and I don't know why. I think I just mentioned it, and Michael Tan just said, "Yeah, I got you," and then just put it on the website.
Yeah, I looked at this. I think I built a C++
probably just
version
ping
of
him on
your
Twitter,
thing.
and he'll do the same thing.
Yeah, I think I built a C++ version of your thing. But there was another guy that built this thing called, his name was Lyrical Polymath, right? And
that seems ostentatious.
He had written this piece of Python code, and in the comment of the piece of Python code, he was actually reading directly from the node. He was reading his data directly from the node, so I was very interested in that. And the comment said, "We scraped 4 weeks of data from the DAO, and it only took 72 hours, right? And
Hmm.
that's why I built what I built, basically, because if you wanted data directly from the node, it literally took 70 hours for 3 weeks worth of data.
It's well, I find it interesting and also kind of valiant that you're trying to give the user power, right? And them to hold on to their data. But you were talking about a lot of human behaviors that even go past the history of the internet that are like almost insurmountable to change. Right.
So
I think all you do is I like that answer. I like it. It actually got me.
I'm a poet. I thought it was a good idea to become a poet. What the fuck? What the hell do you expect?
I like it. I love the energy, but like even now, I find myself
It's a good fuck. Like,
I find myself becoming a middleman to a middleman to everyone I've educated on crypto. There's very few people I've educated, and they're just like off to the races. Most of them are like, "Hey, man, are you busy? It's Saturday on a 3 p.m. I'm clearly busy. Like, I'm a grown adult. I'm clearly busy. But like, what's up, man? How could I help you out? Like, hey, that seed phrase thing. How important was that? Oh, okay. This is gonna be a long conversation. All right. So like, it's almost
Well,
like
hey, I have a sort of ridiculous response to that, but before, almost all the people in the world can read now, but at some point, there was a guy that could read, and then he taught the rest of the people to read. So that's all we're doing here, is trying to educate people, make them understand better that they can't live in a world where they're just going to be taken advantage of. Because I think if we don't build a better system, it only gets worse. It doesn't get better. We have to purposefully build a better system. I
agree with that. Like, that's a big part of. I mean, if you look back at what the internet, like how the internet happened, it slowly but surely centralized into that was somewhat of like an infrastructure play, right? Like, it was efficient to get things done quickly, to architect the infrastructure in such a way that it got architected, and the internet was built, and we ended up with what we have today. Blockchain said, we don't like that anymore. We're going to make something new. And in the process, it makes incredible behavioral changes on people. And because they don't like that, then in order to like kind of bootstrap adoption or take steps in, like, to get people to take the tiny steps in the right direction as opposed to like massive swings of behavioral change, we've made centralized services on top of decentralized services, like Infura, right? Or Etherscan.
Right.
And that allows people, but it got too comfortable in a lot of ways.
Yep.
And so in my opinion, without people like TJ trying to make the same services, but in the ideals of like, you own everything, like giving someone the option to opt out in the event that they want to, and pushing those in the direction of like becoming easier and better, then we're just going to end up in the exact same spot over and over and over again. And like, you have to have people that are willing to say like, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it has to be built, and it's not going to get better until someone goes through the uncomfort of doing it.
And a couple things there. It's ridiculously uncomfortable. It's terribly uncomfortable. It sucks. Trying to build this thing on a desk. My goal has always been to get the same amount of information as Etherscan on a desktop. That's my goal. And it's brutal. It's really brutal. And then the other thing that happens, I think, is that because we don't really solve the problem and we just sort of push off the problem until later, we build on top of that solution that's not the right solution, and it gets increasingly more difficult to go backwards and fix it again. And then you just sort of never go back until you have a revolution. But I see what happened with the blockchain as a revolution. So I kind of purposefully did this. As I said, I'm a little bit older, so I kind of, I'm happy to be way out there on this crusade almost. If it doesn't work out, I'm fine. I'll just go for a hike or something. But
That's
I think it's worth it. I mean, I personally like this because, I mean, it's one of those situations where, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a tinkerer, right? Like, I don't ever, I like having things exactly the way I want them. And that means that I don't like being relegated to someone else's solution. And so when I see methods for getting the data that I want exactly the way I want it, I really, really enjoy it. And when I compare that with not having to rely on third parties to get it, then it's like, I'm through the roof about it. And
Yeah.
that's what this is, right? So like,
Right.
what's incredibly lacking in this ecosystem as it stands today, forever and still today, is like personal accounting software, small business services, like some QuickBooks for crypto. How do I figure out the difference of value that I have today versus when I build it, if I'm running a business and I accept crypto? How do I perform taxes on these types of things? How do I keep track of the money? How do I, all these different things, right? If I want to build that software, or like I want to use that software, there's two ways that can happen. Someone does it and I pay them for it and they get all of my data, or I use the blockchain and have software that pulls the information I want and aggregates it the way I want and gives it to me. That doesn't rely on someone else solving all the problems for me. And I prefer the latter. And what we're seeing is the majority of people are building the former. They're building something like, hey, it's really complicated to pull information off the blockchain. Let us solve that for you so we can have all your data and profit off of that, which is the same shit the internet was doing. As opposed to like, hey, here's software that allows you to pull whatever information you want from the blockchain exactly how you want it in a relatively easy way. And now we can build software on top of that that makes it even easier and still privacy preserving. That allows people to do whatever they want in whatever context they want without having to like expose themselves to people they don't want to expose themselves to.
And it's really weird. It's really weird. I said it was brutal, but it's also kind of weird to be working on a desktop computer because I have to make all kinds of unusual choices when I build this software. So as an example, like a web server like Etherscan, if it gets 10 new, let's say it has 10 users, if it gets 10 more users, the pressure on its infrastructure just doubled, right? On a desktop, if I get 10 new users on a desktop, there's no change whatsoever to my software because I'm running on one desktop for one user. So the relationship of the software with the user is completely different on a desktop than it is on a web server. So in a web server situation, the more users you get, the more resources you have to spend. So you're incentivized to lower the number of resources per user. Whereas for a desktop, I'm just like giving the entire computer to a single user. So I get actually a much more snappy, much more interactive, much more quick piece of software. I have to give up all kinds of stuff. Like I can't look at 10 million records in a tenth of a second or something like that. But I can look at the data for a particular user as deeply as that user wants to look and give him way more data than a website's going to be able to give that same user because I don't have to share the computer with anybody. Now you can scale a website out, but it costs money to scale a website out every time you scale it out. So the whole, it's a very different piece of software, a desktop piece of software. And that's what I'm building, and that's what I'm focused on. And this kind of surprised me as I was building it because after I got it to kind of start working, I kind of looked at it and I'm like, this is really different than a website. It's not a website.
It feels a lot more like
it's a spreadsheet. It's almost a lot more like
traditional software you would get in old computers before the internet.
That's right. It's like it's almost like a spreadsheet.
It's still fed by the internet.
Yeah, it's fed by the node. It's fed by the node software. So it's almost like a spreadsheet because I can scroll through 3,000 records instantaneously which I can't really do on a website. I'm loading pages every time I want to go page, 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 page. And they have to do that because they're delivering thousands of pages a second to thousands of users, right? They can't give me every page all at once. Whereas on a desktop, I'm giving all the data to the user in memory, and I can just scan straight through it. And then there's this other really interesting thing that happens. Because it's not JRush going to Uniswap or JRush going to ENS or JRush going to some other piece of Web3 software. It's actually JRush going to a single piece of software that's getting all of the data that JRush used. So as I'm scrolling through the data, I'm bumping into transactions from Giveth, transactions from Gitcoin, transactions from ENS right after each other. So I can see I don't have to go to separate websites to see all this different activity. I can see everything I've done right in front of me. So I get a very personal view of my own data, and it's perfectly private because it's on my desktop and I'm not sharing it with anybody.
Something that I think we're missing here, some context I think that's lacking is what the model you've gone for is an account-based model. So you're and the way that the blockchain stores things, if we're just say we're sticking to Ethereum for now, right? The way that the Ethereum nodes work today is not set up to answer queries, or like say if like I want to know everything there is to know about this account, right? Throughout its entire history. The way that the data is stored on your computer if you run a node is not set up to answer that question very well. And so what TJ's had to do is create software that pulls that information and then creates a database for you that answers it really quickly. Or like understands like, oh, if you ask that question, this is exactly where I need to go and how I need to ask it, the most efficient way for how it's stored on your computer. And that's a really hard problem to do because the way the node software is set up for, it's optimized for something very differently.
That's right.
And because of that, it's really hard to get account-based information for an individual user or an individual smart contract throughout the history of its entire existence. And the older it is, the more difficult it is to get that information quickly. And so, like, what you've done here needs to be emphasized is that not only have you created a way to get that information quickly for yourself in a privacy-preserving way, but you've also started coming up with ways in which you can share that information well for other people who'd like to do that, so that they can get that information quickly without having to like go through all the process that you're currently going through. So that way, like, in the eventuality that this software gets used and like it's pervasive, if people want this information, like it's snappy for everyone, and the resources required to get it doesn't mean you need 3 terabytes of like expensive storage in order to get it.
Yeah, that's a deep subject. So I tell people what I think happened is that the people who wrote the node software, am I doing okay? D, am I like?
No, you're good to go, man. Just let it rip.
Am I filling the space?
You're good to go. I'm listening.
Give me some of these once in a while. Poets get snapped. So, I think what happened is the people who built the node software, they had a mission which was to synchronize with the chain. That's what the node software has to do. It has to synchronize. It has to get all the transactions and share the transaction, right? It does a second thing, which is deliver the data through the RPC. But I think that they almost completely ignored that part of the task of the node. And I think that the RPC is really inadequate. What the RPC does, it kind of forces people to extract the entire chain because it's kind of so poorly done that you have to extract the entire chain because you can't really get what you want from the RPC, which I think in most cases, huh?
Sorry, Peter.
I think
lead dev of.
Oh no, you know what I'm saying. They're all perfect. Everybody's amazing in the whole world, but they focus on some different things. You can't really say, give me the entire history of an account on to the node. You can't say that because it literally takes 30 days to return the answer, because you have to go back and replay every transaction, because you have to look at every transaction to get the full details because of internal transactions. Are you familiar with that?
Probably getting
So,
No, I want to be. What do
okay,
you
so
mean by
like
internal
a very simple example is a smart contract is called by a regular user, and it initiates another call to another smart contract, which initiates another call to 200 other smart contracts, which initiates 2,500 other smart contracts. So you get this whole big call tree, and at the very bottom, you get, the account that you're interested in gets a token or something. So, and you can't find that until you go down all the way to the bottom of the tree and find that token transfer.
I see. So everything between the top and the bottom is an internal transaction.
Yeah, the moment you start trying to take into account the types of things that are happening when contracts are calling contracts.
Yeah.
Because right now, like if you do something on Ethereum, so anything that happens on Ethereum comes from a user. Like a user has to submit a transaction to the network that calls a function in some smart contract or a transfer. Like you can transfer ETH or call a smart contract, some function or smart contract. And that has to be done by a human. Well, Sentinels if you bring in Open Zeppelin and things like that, right? But once that happens, a smart contract can then call a bunch of other smart contracts in existence to like trigger a bunch of events. And so if you're just looking through Etherscan, you're going to miss a tremendous amount of information that happens when contracts call other contracts.
And you may not know this, but doing token accounting or just plain accounting on Ethereum frequently arrives with a mismatch between what you think you have and what you should, what the chain is or what the data is telling you have. And that's because I think we don't dig deep enough into the data to find those way down at the bottom of that call chain. Somebody transferred some ether or some gas or something got transferred. So if you want to do 18 decimal place accurate accounting, which is what I want to do, because that's what we built an 18 decimal place accurate system. Why can't we account for it? You have to go all the way down to the bottom, and the data is not organized that way on the node. So in order to find that for a single address, you have to scan the entire chain, or you have to extract the entire database. But if you extract the entire database, you're going to get literally 20 terabytes or 15 or 20 terabytes of data. And now you can't do that on a desktop. So now you have a problem.
So tell me the secret sauce. How do you do this?
Yeah. So this is exactly what I tried to do, right? This is exactly what I tried to solve. Okay. And I think it comes down to the fact that there's no index. There's literally no index of addresses in the chain. So I do this, I call it a scrape, and I scrape down through to the bottom of every single one of these 12 million blocks, 10 billion transactions, however many transactions there are. And every one of those calls into the smart contracts, all the way down to the bottom. And I extract addresses and I record where the address appeared. I call them address appearances. So I build an index of address appearances. That's what I built. And then I have an index. And now I can say, where should I look for the transactions for my address? And now the node kind of becomes a fairly good database. It's not great. It's still a little slow. But it's significantly better than scanning the entire history for a given address, because now I kind of can just say, it takes about 20 seconds to read the index and say, here's a list of every appearance of this address. And now I can go and query directly for things like transactions and traces and logs for that address. And I can build an accounting database that balances finally. But the other thing that TrueBlocks does that Corey, your stuff didn't do is it caches the data once it pulls the data. So I said the node is like an okay database, but it's not great.
Let's not pretend that what I did is even close.
No,
to
I know. I'm just
what
kidding. I was just kidding, but I was just kidding. But we also cache the data so that
for faster lookup.
It's literally hundreds of times faster.
Once you pull the here's the process that I see, because I've installed TrueBits. I've gone through a process. There's going to be some hashing it out videos of like me and Jay going through the process of installing it and playing around with it. We'll release later on. But the way I see it is like I have a full node. I have an archive node that runs. You can, if you get access to one, it's just as easy. And I started up TrueBlocks and I said, here's my account. And it said, all right, well, like, let me build a database. Let me build this index that TJ just talked about. What's the index of addresses? And so now, once I have that index of addresses, I can go, all right, TrueBlocks, give me everything about this address. And what it does is says, all right, I know where to look now. And because it knows where to look, it pulls like way quicker from the blockchain as opposed to trolling through like block 0 to block now, where all of these things could possibly be. It says like it's in block this, and this. I'll pull these transactions, and then once I have all these transactions, I have all the information I could ever want, and it then transforms it into the form that I want. Now I have, probably the fastest way possible, all the information that I could ever want about a given account, and all the accounts it's interacted with.
That's right.
And so now I can basically do whatever I want with that information. I can transform it, display it, pivot it, whatever.
How long does it take to build the index for like all the accounts?
Right. I said earlier it takes 30 days to scan the history.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a bit of a misstatement. It probably, I think we were doing it very inefficiently when I got that piece of data, because it takes about 3 days to start from 0 and build the entire index. We used to do it per transaction. Now we do it per block. There's like a trace routine per block that we can use. I think we weren't using it before, but so it takes about 3 days to build the index. Once it's caught up to the front of the chain, it kind of easily stays up with the front of the chain because there's only one block every 14 seconds. And we process that like instantaneously, really. But so it takes a couple days to build initially, and then it just stays up. You have to run a piece of software continually to scrape, but it stays up.
Wouldn't that mean there's like an ever-growing memory need for the software, right? If it's continuously I mean, just like all block. I mean, there's ever-growing resource needs.
Well, we're on a desktop, so we're really constrained. So I was mentioning earlier that you can do things on a desktop that you wouldn't do on a website. For example, you would never store data in a file and read the file. But believe it or not, we have a single user. So on a website, if you were storing data and reading it from a file when the user requested the data, you would be in trouble very quickly because you have 10,000 people hitting the file or the hard drive. When you have a single user, it's how a computer works. So you can actually easily store the data on file, on disk, and read it from disk. So it's actually surprising. I was very surprised that you could do that, but it's true. And it's directly because there's a single user. There's no shared data here. It's just
something D was getting to.
You got to download the whole blockchain.
Well, that's what I wanted to get to next. Is that like, yeah, I said that like, if I wanted to build this stuff from scratch, then I need an archive node and I need to run through this entire index. But what TJ has done additionally for people who don't have those resources is basically he's come up with a way to chunk that index up into like a bunch of different pieces and put them on IPFS. So that way, like, if you're starting from scratch, you don't have access to this type of thing.
Boy, no,
There's the magic. I was like,
here's my
where's
address.
No, this is fucking amazing.
Go ahead, please. You do this part. This is what's awesome.
No, this is
so
just
awesome.
beyond, this is just beyond ridiculous. Okay, so yes, we have this index that comes from immutable data, right? Like block 3 million hasn't changed since block 3 million happened, right? So once we index it, that data never changes, right? But if I'm building a regular database index and I'm adding new records to the front of from the front of the chain, and I sort an index is sorted, so I'm sorting that index. Now I've ruined its immutability. So I've created an index will not be immutable if you're sorting it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't like that because I want to recognize and preserve immutable data. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I wanted to put it on IPFS. And that doesn't really work if I'm sorting all the time. It changes the hash. So what I do is I just keep adding to this growing index until it gets to 2 million appearances, 2 million records in the database. And then I sort it and I put that on IPFS and I get back a hash. But then I do something else because now it's immutable. I can take all of those addresses and create a Bloom filter in front of this index chunk. So I have a chunk of an index and I put a Bloom filter in front of it, right? And I get from like 50 megabytes, it goes down to about 50K. And I put that on IPFS as well. And then if a user starts and they don't feel like building the index themselves, they can download the entire list of all the Bloom filters onto their hard drive.
Jake, can you explain what a Bloom filter is real quick?
Yeah, so it's a way to take, in this case, addresses. Mm-hmm. And what I can do is I can represent the entire 2 million records in probably 1/100th as much space by just putting a little ones and zeros that represent the addresses. Mm. And it allows me to say, is the address that I'm interested in the index chunk? And if it is, only then do I download the full index chunk.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I
explained that. Let me try that in a different way. So like, I
understand it.
Yeah, but others may not because I think it's Bloom filters are really weird. And more often than not, they're used in crypto for privacy preserving methods, right? And it's because what it's saying is, me as a user, I want to get information from somebody who has it. I don't have anything on my desktop or my computer. And I want to query a node that I know has this information. But I don't want to expose to them what I'm asking for. So what I say, and this is how you make a Bloom filter, you say, here's a pattern. Give me back everything you have that matches this pattern. And depending upon how explicit or like detailed my pattern is, like it gives away how much information that I care about. If I said, give me everything you have with this full address, then it's going to know exactly what address I'm looking for and the types of information I want to know. And so like it'll return less information, but it'll know exactly what I want. Mm-hmm. As opposed to say, give me everything you have that has addresses that start with these 4 characters. And so like it can't really know what address that I'm actually looking for, right. But I'm going to get a lot more data. And so what it's done, okay, go ahead.
And you may even get a chunk that doesn't have your address in it. So you have to actually say, just give me everything you have. I don't want to tell you too much, but and then you have to search yourself to see if it's in there or not. So we use this to avoid downloading the larger chunk. So we only download the Bloom filters. And then what we want to do, and we haven't quite gotten this far, is we want to pin those Bloom filters on IPFS. So anybody that uses our system pins the Bloom filters. And what happens now is the more users we get, unlike a website, the more users we get, the better the data gets because everybody's pinning it. And this is exactly what distributed software is supposed to be like, that the more users you add, the better the system gets, not the other way around. And then another thing that's really amazing is, let's say I scan through the Bloom filters and I find that JRush needs 27 actual chunks of the index. So I download those 27 chunks and I pin those 27 chunks. So now I'm pinning some portion of the entire index. And you do it and you get a 55 other chunks and you pin those, but there may be overlap between the two. So now as a community, we're all helping each other by downloading and pinning this one thing that's missing from the node that allows us to get direct access to the data that we want. So that's what I'm trying to build. It's really hard to communicate that. It's really hard to even figure out how to make that work, but that's what I'm kind of trying to get to. And I'm getting pretty far, actually. So it's crazy. It's crazy.
So
Crazy.
So like every single time you sort it, you basically pin that sort and you hash what changed. Is that how it's able to keep it all organized? Is that
what we do is we just keep looking at the chain, and each time a block comes in, we extract every address from the block all the way down through that whole call chain of all the smart contracts all the way to the bottom. And we add that to our index, and then we sort that. And then we say, is there 2 million records in the index? And if there is, then we stop adding to that chunk. We don't add any more. The next block will be added to the next chunk. And then we write it to IPFS. Then we build a Bloom filter and write the Bloom filter to IPFS. And then we keep track of the chunk. The chunk has a certain block range in it, and it has 2 hashes, one for the Bloom, one for the index.
So to like keep that in mind in terms of like you as an end user, what you end up doing is to say like, I'm in front of this piece of software on my desktop. Give me all of the things that happened with my personal address. And it says, all right, I know how to ask that question to the blockchain. And it says, so basically I have that list of indexes from all of the different blocks, all the Bloom filter indexes. Right. And I say, all right, so what blocks do I need to download in order to get all of the transactions? Which is a reasonable thing to ask without exposing any information to anybody. Right. And so it says, all right, you need blocks X, Y, and Z. Maybe it brings down 20 different blocks.
Chunks. I would call them.
Sorry.
That's right.
Chunks of transactions from all over the blockchain, and then it looks through those and pulls out. So like each chunk is going to have, we'll just for round numbers, say 1,000 transactions in them. And it says like, well, you have 2 from this block, 15 from this chunk, 20 from this chunk, whatever, right? And it says like, now here's all your stuff, but we're going to keep the chunks and we're going to pin those. And so what happens is that like by me getting my information in a very privacy preserving way, in a very efficient privacy preserving way from the blockchain, not only am I have like all of my data in front of me that I can query immediately, quickly. I've also helped support the network for anyone else who happens to need those chunks, right? Because I only need like 20 transactions in a given chunk.
That's right.
But like there could be tens of thousands in a given chunk.
2 million.
And now I'm supporting that part of the blockchain for anyone else who needs to have it.
That's right. And what's interesting is people tend to interact with each other a lot as well. You interact with your friends interact with you, so you kind of help each other more on a friend by friend basis. But the other thing that happens is smart contracts like Uniswap actually hits every single Bloom filter with a positive. And so if they were using it, they would download every single chunk. And now Uniswap is storing the entire index, which to me is fair because Uniswap is benefiting the most from having their smart contract. So they kind of, as a result of just downloading this index and wanting to get their own data, they help the whole community by pinning this thing themselves. So the whole thing is about 70 gigabytes big. The whole.
That's fair. I find that very interesting too, because then as a business, like if you're trying to prove a business case, you could say like, look at my blockchain saturation. I'm in all the blocks, baby.
Yeah, that's a metric for
people are using me.
Metric for success. Like
people are using me. I'm in all the blocks, baby. Sorry, I'm I got a little marketer in me somewhere. He pops out, but like,
That's cool.
but,
though. I never thought about that, but that's good. Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah.
It's directly related, right?
if you keep thinking about it, you got my email, TJ.
Yeah.
So no, damn. So one, I think it's very sexy because that kind of answered my question. Because the way you started talking about TrueBlocks, I was like, well, that just implies I have to have 80,000 terabyte hard drive eventually because I'm gonna have to keep memory of all these times that I've searched through the blockchain, but leveraging IPFS, which is I'm pretty sure I'm in this on the interplanetary file system.
That's right.
All right, cool. Sometimes I get it wrong. To actually store these things, so that's pretty slick.
So you're storing a little more than you need,
Yeah.
but not everything. When you think about running a blockchain node, you need to do all of it, right? And so the goal is to build software that allows you to get only the information you need in a privacy preserving way, which means that you use things like bloom filters, which gives you a little more than what you actually need.
Yeah, it
In the
does.
process of like retrieving and getting a little more than you actually need, you end up like helping serve the entire community.
That's right. Because that's, to me, is just that's what one of the benefits of these decentralized networks is that it gets better the more people use it. It's a network effect basically.
Mhm.
So so that's what I'm building. I'm trying to so that's kind of the infrastructure part that I'm building because I kind of need that to build my application. Then I'm building on top of that. I'm building applications where I can actually see this data now. So I want to, I can imagine building like a DAO, a DAO dashboard or something like that, or, personal dashboard or something along those lines. And because we see every single transaction, we actually get enough information to balance these accounts down to the 18th decimal place. And that's the other thing that we've been able to do. I think because we're not dealing with this giant big data situation, right? We're very, very focused on a single account. Every time that my accounting doesn't balance, I fix a bug in my code. And over time, we fixed all the bugs. So our account's balanced now. Now, we might run into your account and you're doing some kind of crazy DeFi things and then we won't balance, but then we would debug that and fix that problem. So I really want to get to the point where, because I'll go all the way back to the beginning. When I get into the DAO situation, I want to see what it's like to actually have people that have direct access to their own data and they do fully understand what's happening on the chain and they understand what other people are doing. They understand what they're doing. Because I want to live in a world where our software helps us work together without fear of not knowing what's happening. If we know what's happening on the software, we're more likely to participate in the software, I think.
Yeah.
So
It's you hit the nail on the head. The word is fear,
yeah,
right? And that's how things get centralized.
it
Right?
is. It's exactly.
It's fear. I have a anecdotal story, but I'm helping someone. I helped someone move a large amount of their crypto holdings onto a hardware wallet, and then gave them instructions as to what not to do. And then he flirted with the what not to do. And then when I went in and I scanned the address and I saw all zeros, I was like, okay, so why didn't you listen? And his face lost blood and I almost turned white, which is hard to do. If you're watching, you can see why. But I was like, what did you do? So then I went over to, I had to go, I fixed everything. And I was like, okay, so remember what I told you exactly what to do and what not to do? Follow that this time. But now what I've actually created is a central point of failure in myself.
Right. No, you're right. You're right.
Right. And so it's just hard. And so I guess what I'd ask is like, what would you feel are, because I feel like you move in such a platform of confidence, like you said, because like, I'll just go take a hike. If you listen or not, I don't care. I'm going to go take a hike.
Yeah.
What are
no stopping me? There's no stopping.
What would you say are the, I guess, the keystones of how to educate users and how they should be behaving when it comes to blockchain tech, right?
Boy. Yeah, it's tough.
It's a deep question. I
It's
know.
really, really, really tough. I go back to the guys that are the men and women who built Bitcoin. I go back to them, and they just plugged along and they built a piece of software that worked how it worked, and it laid stuff on people's doorstep and just said, "This is what it is. This is how it works," and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with this new piece of software in the world, because we're just going to engineer this thing the way it needs to be engineered so that it works the way that it should work. And the people that need to keep up and be educated, in some way, you kind of have to build a system that doesn't even allow them to not be educated. They can interact with the system without being educated, because the system doesn't work in a way that is detrimental. I think that's kind of what Bitcoin did, is they admitted that there's going to be bad people in the world, and the system they built is going to work anyway in the face of these people that are, evildoers or something. So
I do think most great systems work that way. Like, it's just this like never-ending flirtation between like centralized and decentralized. Like, for example, if I want to be a company right now and go work on bridges, I have that right, but I got to pass a whole lot of tests and have a whole mountain of knowledge before I can just go work on a bridge. Right. And it's kind of like we're just kind of repeating that cycle, which kind of takes us, man, I feel like we have to have a part 2 of the interview. We never even flirted with why blockchain is turning into the internet, and we're all fearing for our lives.
We're moving
it's going to be bad, man. It's bad.
We'll bring JT back on and then just go full prognostication mode.
Oh man,
I want to hear that.
I really want to hear
Can
that
we bring
part.
you on again?
Can we go for a part 2? Like, that's one thing I really wanted to talk about, because I've talked about this for years now. Corey's probably tired.
That'd be fun, because we've talked about this before. Like, I think we've had a few people on that had an inclination towards what the internet was like in the early days and how it moved towards a centralized service. Why don't we have you back on to talk about that and how what blockchain is currently doing is following that mold?
I'd love to. It's all about the hardware, by the way.
So, well, let's go ahead and wrap this, because we have to, not because we want to, with some of our trademark questions. Jesse, I'll let you go first.
All right. TJ, is what you do actually difficult?
For me, no.
Dang, okay.
This man moves with confidence. I need some confidence.
No, I'm kidding. The reason I say that is because I'm so obsessive that I can't stop.
Okay. I need some of that confidence drip in my life.
What he's doing is very hard.
So if you listeners think it's not, go listen to the interview again, and then all right. And then what I will ask you is, in 10 words or less, can you describe, should I go Ethereum or should I say blockchain?
It's your choice, bro.
In 10 words or less, can you describe Ethereum?
The best data that's ever existed in the world. History. The best data that's ever existed in the history of the world.
Okay.
I like it when we ask that question and the immediate response is, damn it, how do I do this?
That's brutal. That was tough.
Well, TJ, thank you very much for coming on the show. I had a inkling this would be a very good interview. When I saw it was like I was up at like 3 a.m, and I saw it was either a tweet that you were in or a Medium post that you did. But I saw it and I was like,
it's on YouTube, wasn't it? It's a tweet that had a YouTube clip.
Yeah, a tweet that had a YouTube clip of TrueBlocks, and then I sent that to Alicia, and I was like, we need to get this guy on the show. And like, that's it. Like,
and I was like, hey, I know JT. I know TrueBlocks. Let's do this.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. Did you just call him JT?
TJ.
Oh, okay. I was like, am I saying the wrong thing? Okay. Thank you very much. Of course, I hope we can get a part 2 very soon. Before we get into our normal cadence of things, we can put you back on. And yeah, that's all I got.
No, it was a great pleasure. I'm really glad to see you guys. Get to know you a little bit. And Corey, thank you as always for everything. You're great.
Thank you.
You hear me. There's people that hear me
You're
in the
doing
world.
the right thing, in my opinion. So we'll try and boost you up as best we can.
Appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.